All right, I'm so excited for another edition of Manifestor Mindset. I am here with the founder of Whoop, Will Ahmed. And Will, I got dressed up for our appearance today. I don't normally dress down so much, especially on a Monday, but I want to kind of get in the zone. So I'm wearing my favorite workout shirt. I don't know if you can see it.
Be uncomfortable.
Be uncomfortable. That's my motto. So I actually had shirts made. The shirt in and of itself is uncomfortable because you could barely read it. Kind of has to make your eyes work. And I'm also wearing my Whoop, by the way. And this is not just shameless product placement because I am not an investor in your company or have anything to do with it. I just happen to love data and measuring myself. We're going to get into all that, but thanks for coming on board. Thanks, Will. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Where are you talking to from right now with this great backdrop?
I am actually at home in Boston.
Okay, awesome. Well, so for those, let me do a little bit of setup. For those who don't know, Whoop. Whoop is part of the whole quantified self revolution, of which there are a number of different devices, starting with, the Garmin watch and Apple Watch to a lesser extent. And there's a Aura Ring, and then there's Whoop. And I have tried probably everything. And I really wanted Will to come on because I thought what Will has built is really exceptional. And something that I have used and which has helped me kind of stay on my game when I lapse and whatnot. We'll get into all that. But out of all the different products in the place, it's my opinion that what Will has built is the best. So when you come across that, you want to understand how he came to do it. So today we'll sort of go through everything. He's also learned a ton of fascinating things about COVID, which we'll get into a little bit. We're also going to take questions, so ask questions. We have Heather right now down below. You cannot see her. I might throw her up, but she'd probably yell at me. Heather on my team, who's the genius behind all this. She's going to get ready with your questions. So we'll spend about 20 minutes talking, 30 minutes talking, and we'll get into it. But first, Will, can you just take me back to 8 years ago, whatnot, what led you to found Whoop, and what was the state of the quantified self when you first got into this?
Yeah, it probably goes back even further than that. I was always into sports and exercise. I was playing squash while I was at Harvard. As an undergrad, I was a college athlete. And I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing to my body while I was training. So I was someone who used to overtrain, where you get like fitter and fitter and fitter, and then you fall off a cliff. And I was surrounded by other athletes who would get injured or misinterpret fitness peaks or not necessarily understand the importance of recovery or sleep. And so for me, it was doing a lot of just personal research. Like I was just fascinated generally. What does it take to understand your body? And at a place like Harvard, I felt like the 3 or 4 hours a day that I was spending exercising was like the least intelligent period of my day. It was just, it felt like the Stone Ages. And so I got very interested in physiology. I did a lot of research while I was in school. I read about 500 medical papers. And I wrote a thesis around how to continuously understand the human body. So literally, it was called the feedback tool, how to measure intensity, recovery, and sleep. And today, Whoop measures strain, recovery, and sleep. So in a lot of ways, it was the precursor to what we've built. And I decided fall of my senior year that I was going to start the company. And by the summer, I had met 2 additional great people to help me build the business, John Capilupo and Aurelia Nicolai. And we started working at the Harvard Innovation Lab. And we were off for the races from there.
What was just now we sort of take for granted all these different elements that we could track we have pedometers everywhere and whatnot. But like back in 2012, I don't even recall what was commonplace at that point. How much had been introduced into the market.
So the main technology on the market that I was fascinated by was the chest strap, which is like the heart rate monitor, goes around your chest, measures heart rate accurately, used by endurance athletes. And about 10 million of those were sold a year. And I thought it was like the clumsiest, ugliest technology. And so that was probably the most accurate thing that a consumer could buy. Separately, Fitbit was maybe, a $50 million company in private markets. Like I remember I went to a career fair. This is pretty funny. I went to a career fair at Harvard. The CEO of Fitbit was giving the career fair, and there was like 3 of us there to sort of interview for jobs. I, of course, was just interested in Fitbit, and 2 other people I think actually wanted a job. And so that was like a really early stage company. Obviously, Fitbit now just sold for two billion plus dollars to Google and has sold millions of units. And then, within a couple of years, there was products from Nike, so the Fuel Band. There was the Adidas Me Coach. There was Jawbone Up, which ended up selling millions of units too. There's a company called Basis, Qantas, Project Florida, Athos. I don't know. There's probably a dozen companies that I had to, at various cycles in building the business, talk about. And actually a lot of them have gone out of business. So there's been real consolidation, I would say, in the wearables market. And today, the main people that we're asked about are Apple and Google.
Right. And I'm interested because, a lot of people out there, let's say somebody has a great idea or they're passionate about a topic, but then they scan the marketplace and they say, well, there's already big players who've got sort of a decent, grab on the market. How am I, a kid out of Harvard, with a passion for sports, like, how am I going to create a business and compete? Like, you had to go through a period in which that's a pretty audacious stipulation, right? That I'm going to do this. How'd you get your head ready, and how'd you decide it was worth the effort?
Well, you do have to be obsessed with the problem. You have to be obsessed with the problem more than the solution, because that'll help you figure out the right solution. You have to be pretty stubborn, I think, in those early days. Like, I think I had a lot of people tell me not to build Whoop or that I was going to fail. And I think you want to make sure that you have a contrarian point of view that is later going to be right. So our contrarian point of view that was later right was that sleep and recovery were more important to understanding performance than exercise or anything related to performance itself. So when I met with coaches and athletes in 2011, 12, 13, all they wanted was more information about exercise and training. They wanted more accurate video analysis. They wanted more data on sweat. And when I asked them, well, what are the challenges that you're facing? A lot of it came back to injuries and overtraining, lack of recovery. And my point of view was, well, you actually have a lot of information on those 3 hours that you guys are together and they're training. You have no information on the other 21 hours of the day. And so I believed if we could create a 24/7 monitor that also focused on sleep and recovery, we could actually create a tool that provided more value than what they were even asking for. And I also believed that the data needed to be really accurate, which was, again, somewhat contrarian, because you had products like the Fuel Band and Fitbit and Jawbone, pushing steps and having consumer success, like real consumer success. But what inevitably happened is you had these big drop-off rates over time and a lack of consistency because people realized that steps wasn't actually a valuable metric. So a lot of it, I think, was staying committed to that initial vision. And of course, if Whoop had failed, everyone would have said, well, he wasn't listening to the market, or he wasn't listening to customer feedback. But sometimes you really do have to build it and they will come.
And when you're auditing your skill sets and you're getting ready, you're very passionate about this. How did you figure out, did you need a co-founder? Who would you need to bring on board, right? Because one is identifying the metrics that matter, right? Because you had to sort of invent the whole phenomenon of, okay, well, how am I going to measure recovery, right? What's a proxy for recovery? And then you have to, weaponize that in the form of a device. And so you have form factor issues and everything else. There's a lot of skill sets there that, unless you're God, I presume you didn't possess all that. So how did you kind of figure out who to bring on board, in your team?
Yeah, a lot of it, I think one of the best things about starting a business is it reveals to you very quickly your holes and your weaknesses, and it reveals some of your strengths. And so what was obvious to me from day one was I needed very technical people around me. And so John Capilupo, our chief technology officer, he was studying some of the hardest math classes in the country at Harvard. And it turns out his father was a professor of exercise physiology. So that right there is already, you got a great overlap in physiology, but you got someone who's deeply mathematical and technical over here. And you got someone who's maybe better at sales and marketing and product over here. So that was great because we had really complementary skills. And then Aurelian, he was known as the king of the 3D printer in school. So he was a phenomenal mechanical engineer, and he could rapidly prototype all sorts of different things. And so we knew that we were going to ultimately need to build hardware. And so having someone who could rapidly prototype different sensor configurations and ideas, that was pretty valuable. And again, a completely different skill set than John, who was more on algorithms, data science, and statistics. So the three of us had very complementary skills, and we're still all building Whoop today.
So
as the founding team.
Interesting, because a lot of times I think people relegate tech as something they can outsource, find somebody overseas relatively cheap. I don't need to have them as part of my team. If you had done that with Whoop, would there be a Whoop?
Definitely not. I mean, so much of what made Whoop what it is today is owning the end-to-end stack of the tech. I think whenever you're building a business, you have to ask yourself, how many things do we actually need to innovate around to be successful? And if your value proposition is to unlock human performance and measure things like sleep and recovery, and you're doing that because you believe no one else does that, it's very hard to go find that tech on the street. It's very hard to then, outsource the core IP of your business. If you are, if you think your skill set that you're bringing to the market is the marketing point of view or the brand point of view, then okay, maybe you could have a website built by someone else. Maybe you could have a lightweight app built by someone else. But let's not call you then a technology company. Let's call you a direct-to-consumer business or something else. So for us, we really wanted to be a hardcore technology business. That was going to be the value that we were adding to the market.
That's a great way to put it. So everyone, keep those questions coming. I mean, Will clearly has a lot to add just about business in general. I want to pivot now to launch in version 1.0. I'm just curious if you were building a product initially for elite athletes, or is that sort of a marketing strategy to start at the top and then the rest will sort of follow? Just take me back to your early thoughts.
Well, it was both. I mean, we were initially building a product for elite athletes, and we believed that that was the best entry point to the market. So telling a professional athlete that you're going to be able to measure how recovered they are is an enormously powerful value proposition to a professional athlete, and especially if there's nothing else on the market that can measure recovery. And we realized that quickly. I mean, 2 of our first 100 users were people like LeBron James and Michael Phelps. I was shocked how accessible the world's very, very best were if you had that strong of a value proposition. And so, before we ever had real sales or real business model, having what I would now in hindsight call a pretty shitty product that the world's best were willing to wear, that was pretty validating. And it was a sign that we were onto something, because we knew that eventually the product is going to have longer battery life. Eventually it's going to be able to send data faster. All these things will come. But that core question of how much pain is someone willing to put up with if you can actually deliver a few of these numbers? And it turned out they're willing to put up with a lot. And I actually think that's a good sign. That's a sign that you're onto something. If your your customer is willing to put up with a lot to get at that core value proposition that you're giving them, that's probably a sign that you're onto something. And for us, it was enormously validating to be able to have these super, super high-end athletes use our product at a time when it wasn't really a consumer-facing experience. It wasn't something that was simple to take out of the box and get up and running. It had an 18-hour battery life. You're swapping battery packs on every 6 hours to keep the thing alive. It took forever to send data to your phone. We had all kinds of issues with the software. So it was, I'm kind of a product guy. I was not proud of it, but the core science underneath it and the things it was able to tell an individual was quite powerful. And so for us, it was a sign, keep going. And it helped us raise capital at a time when probably there wasn't much else to speak of from a business model standpoint.
And so you do your first round in what year is that?
Well, we did a seed round in 2013, and that was maybe a $3 million round. And then every 12 or 18 months or so, we roughly doubled the round size, with more recently being a $55 million round in Q4 of last year.
Congratulations, by the way. So at what point you start saying, okay, I need to tap into that passion and advocacy on the athlete side, do my first big marketing deal, but begin to morph into a, expand the tent basically to bring in the weekend warriors and whatnot? What was that evolution like?
Well, it was two things. One, it was a question of when do we actually have the user experience to a point where a consumer is going to find it very easy and friendly to use. And then two, at what point do we actually have to start making money as a business? Because it's great to have, people of the level of a LeBron or a Phelps or a Rory McIlroy be your customers, but there's just not that many of them in the world. I mean, you teach market sizing probably all day at HBS. It's just a tiny market of pro athletes, and even the right underneath that, college athletes, high-end amateurs. There's just not a lot of people there. So we always wanted Whoop to be something that could be for high-performance people of all levels, aspirational people of all levels. We still believe today that the best way to unlock your performance as an individual is to understand things about your sleep and your recovery and how that, functions into your diet or the stress that you can take on in your daily life. So we knew that the measurements we were collecting were always ready for the consumer market. We designed the app even in those early days to be ready for the consumer market. A lot of it was just getting the technology to a place where it was a comfortable and seamless experience. And I think Whoop today is great at the things it does for all the things it doesn't do. We're not a smartwatch. We don't have a high resolution screen. You're not going to make phone calls with this thing. It doesn't have a microphone in it. It's not listening to you, but it measures health data really well. And we give you really powerful feedback on that. And we go deep on that. And so for the person who's actually looking to understand performance, they get value out of Whoop.
So you made something a great point. I get pitched a lot because of my different hats. One of them is obviously sports with the Miami Dolphins. I've been around sports a long time. Is that I generally do not like businesses that are tailored specifically to sports teams in particular, because I'm sure you probably learned maybe in these early days, so maybe I'll do a couple of marketing deals with a couple of teams. They're the worst entities to deal with because they want everything free because they understand the market power. Plus the market's tiny, so you can get seduced by the logos and the fact that they're, on the back pages of the papers and they have these big outsized brands. They actually have relatively small reach and they're really hard to deal with. So just anyone out there, you always got to stay focused on how big is the TAM, how big is the market that I'm going after. And generally, if the market is basically professional sports teams, that's nice, but it's not going to get you there. If it's a validator, know the pain you're going to deal with, and it's not going to be a revenue driver. It may be, an endorsement, but you're going to pay for that. But those are never big businesses at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I actually made a rule like in 2014 or 15 even that we were not going to give Whoop away for free. I don't care how big of an athlete it was. We're not giving it away for free. And the reason for that was I didn't believe that there was any amount of money, let alone a free product, that we could pay someone to wear Whoop if it didn't give them value. And we even saw this, like the Nike Fuel Band. You didn't see LeBron and Tiger wearing that thing, right? Because it wasn't a valuable product to a high performance person. So there was no amount of money, I believe, that we'd be able to pay to an athlete or any person to wear something 24/7 if they didn't get value at it. And on the flip side, if it actually delivered the value that we were marketing, they should want to pay for it. And they might want to be willing to pay a lot for it. And it forced us, I think, being really stubborn about that forced us to develop a product that people actually liked, because you just had to look yourself in the mirror whether or not someone's using something because they're getting value out of it or not.
That's an interesting point and dilemma that I see a lot in the sort of marketing around celebrities and whatnot. Everyone thinks, "Oh, let me get a celebrity on board my product." But at the end of the day, if you're just paying them cash to go ahead and do an Instagram post, you're not going to get a lot of value out of it. So I personally think if it's something enough for me to want to back to get paid for, I should probably want to ride along and invest in too, right? Or else just somewhat of a similar to what you're talking about over here. So let's bring everybody forward, right? For those who don't know, not everyone knows exactly what Whoop does. Can you sort of describe the feature set a bit and the key takeaways, and then we'll morph into what you've learned through COVID. But first, I just want to set the table as to what does Whoop measure?
Yeah, so Whoop is a 24/7 membership that includes hardware and software and weekly reports that tells you how your body's performing. We measure everything around how you sleep, how your body's recovering, the stress that you're putting on it, and various exercises that you may be doing over time. And it's a monthly subscription. So you can pay as little as $18 a month. And if you're not getting value out of Whoop, you can cancel and you keep the hardware. The hardware is all included. So a lot of it is us having to deliver value to you every day, every week, every month, to see if we can give you insights to your body.
What do you find to be are the most actionable insights that people gravitate? For me personally, I love the strain metric, although I don't know what the word strain means, right? Sometimes I crave a different word, right? But nonetheless, I'm a hamster in a wheel where I'll be trying to get that strain number up so the little light will go off and tell me that I hit the number. It does make me work harder, right? Like what gets measured gets done is the whole premise of your device. But what is the most actionable insights you think people take away from it?
I think the single most valuable thing that we've brought to market is this idea of recovery. So you get a score from 0 to 100%, red, yellow, green. How prepared am I for the day? And often this isn't something you can feel. You may wake up and say you feel good and your body's actually run down. And you may wake up and feel a little, almost sick, and it turns out your body's fine. And so in general, people overrate feelings and they underrate these indicators that their body has. We call them secrets that your body's trying to tell you that for the most part you can't measure. And so that's what Whoop does. It tries to measure those secrets that your body's trying to tell you. And so recovery, that really helps people optimize a lot of different things. First, it helps them understand, is today a day I should be exercising and taking a lot of strain on my body? Or is today a day I should try to rest? I mean, Whoop is the first fitness product to tell you not to exercise, right? Which is sort of a mindset shift all of a sudden in itself. And then sleep becomes a big thing for people, and something that they gravitate to is just understanding that, first of all, the time you spend in bed isn't actually the quality sleep that you got, right? If you spend 7 hours in bed, you didn't get 7 hours of sleep. Maybe you got 6 hours of sleep. And then if you look at that 6 hours, how much of it was restorative sleep? Your body is spending different stages in sleep. So you'll be in light, you'll be awake, you'll be in slow wave sleep, and you'll be in REM sleep. Well, it turns out slow wave and REM are way more valuable than light or awake. Slow wave is when your body is building 95% of its human growth hormone. So the idea that you get stronger in the gym is actually false. You get stronger in slow wave sleep. That's when your body's repairing itself, right? REM sleep is when your mind's repairing. That's when you're dreaming. So that's cognitive repair, and every human being needs that. So, we'll work with individuals, athletes, anyone, executives even. They'll spend 7 hours in bed. Turns out they're only getting 5 hours of sleep. And then within that 5 hours, maybe they're only getting 30 minutes of restorative sleep. Meanwhile, you look at someone else, they spend 8 hours in bed, they get 7 hours and 45 minutes of sleep, and 5 hours of it's restorative. I mean, talk about, time allocation. How do you want to use those 7 hours when you're in bed? You want to try to get as great sleep you can. You're going to feel like a different person. So those are some of the things that become quite actionable. And I like to say you can only really manage what you measure. So once you measure these things, okay, how much restorative sleep am I getting? How fast do I recover? How hard are my workouts? Then you can start to action off of them. Okay, well, it turns out if I don't drink alcohol, I sleep better. Well, I sort of already knew that, but okay, now I'm going to drink less. Okay, if my room's colder, I get more restorative sleep. If I go to bed and wake up at the same times, it turns out I get more restorative sleep, and so on and so forth. And we could go into a million of those things, but you, the individual, are empowered to figure out what makes you better.
Yeah, I find I had no idea the correlation between slow wave and how I feel. Obviously, how would one know that unless they're measuring it? But I find a perfect correlation between slow wave and just how I generally feel. I'm the most horrific sleeper. I mean, anybody who knows me, it's like I'm legendary. I'm up at 4:30 against my will. So, but then I can't start. I just start the day, and then by 9, I'm dying. But sometimes your device horrifies me with the feedback, and then I'm like, all right, stick to it. Like
you're like a shortstop. I remember we worked with a shortstop once. I won't say what it is, but he, this is like the 33rd best shortstop in the world, right? And the dude spends 9 hours in bed and gets like 3 hours of sleep. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't need to be catching ground balls or working on his batting average. He needs to learn how to sleep. The guy's playing drunk, so it's like
I've done incredible things. Like when I was superhuman, I slept for 2 days. When I marathons, every marathon, 2 of the 3, I ran with 0 sleep. I wish I had your Whoop because I did not sleep.
That would have been interesting. Yeah, you were probably in the red
and then I had to go read studies to find. I was like, somebody must have subjected somebody to this condition. I always read studies. Sure enough, I found some Danish cyclists who were deprived sleep to see, and it didn't affect their performance at all. I was like, okay, I can run this marathon for 5 hours and not. But I'm a horrendous sleeper, and I find the biggest change, which is interesting. It's like skiing. When you first learn how to ski, you got to sort of look to where you're going and surrender. It's a little bit like this. Once you know what's wrong, you kind of find a way to fix it. So for me, once I introduced meditation prior to bed, at around 10 o'clock consistently, I found that
that'll help.
My slow wave sleep increased dramatically. Let's talk a little bit about the typical American, right? Like, give us what you've learned about, our behaviors, good and bad. How much do we sleep? And how much should we be sleeping, to get a good recovery, all that kind of stuff?
Well, I'll give you some interesting data right now on how people have changed during COVID-19. So it actually turns out that the WHOOP population is now sleeping about 30 minutes more during COVID-19, or this sort of period that we're in, versus before that. And we're actually seeing things like resting heart rate decline a little bit, heart rate variability go up. So those are good physiological changes. And it's a sign, actually, that commuting is this huge period of your life that if you cut out, you can allocate more to sleep. So we are seeing some healthier behaviors on Whoop. It's interesting also, obviously, a lot more runs, from an exercise standpoint. Activities like running and cycling have gone up a lot. Things like weightlifting, a lot of different sports, those have declined pretty dramatically, as you can imagine, from COVID-19.
That's interesting. So from a mental health standpoint, people are under more duress, but they have more time in their life to sort of take care of their body, including sleep. I found that matches mine. Let's talk a little bit about some of the incredible insights you've learned to be able to, I wouldn't say the word predict, but at least identify that the body is under duress consistent with what COVID is doing to your body. And for those who don't know, COVID is a lower respiratory disease, right? That basically creates certain, tails, right? Trademark signals that you are sick that Whoop can pick up. So why don't you explain the science a little bit and what you've discovered?
Yeah, so just to give a little background, Whoop added COVID-19 tracking in early March. So we were, I think, the first consumer app that actually had COVID-19 tracking in an app. And what that allowed us to do was build up a pretty large data set of what does Whoop data look like before, during, and after COVID-19. And we've got now a couple thousand responses of Whoop members who have had COVID-19. And we've been able to look at that data. And so an important thing for people to understand is that when it comes to illness or really anything, you have specific and non-specific indicators. A non-specific indicator for illness would be an elevated resting heart rate, or a decreasing heart rate variability, or more disturbances while you're sleeping, red recovery on Whoop, right? These are things that we've always seen when someone gets sick on Whoop, but we don't know if that's the general cold or a flu or COVID-19, right? Like, those are non-specific indicators, what I just explained. What's been fascinating is that Whoop measures respiratory rate. And respiratory rate used to be an incredibly boring statistic for our population because it's just measuring the number of breaths that you have in a minute. And a typical respiratory rate for any healthy individual is probably somewhere from 10 to 20 breaths per minute. And so we measure this while you're sleeping. And it turns out that for people who have COVID-19, they'll have a massively elevated respiratory rate 2 to 3 days before they even feel symptoms. So if we look at respiratory rate for people who have indicated that they are healthy or people who have indicated they are sick, respiratory rate does not change. Even if you're sick, we don't typically see a change in respiratory rate. But if you've indicated COVID-19, we see a huge jump in respiratory rate. And that's 2 to 3 days, again, before you feel symptoms. And what's so powerful about that is it's specific again, right? It seems to be specific to COVID-19. It's a lower respiratory tract infection. Now, mind you, if you got, say, bronchitis, we would expect to see your respiratory rate as well go up because that's also a lower respiratory tract infection. But there's just a lot less people getting bronchitis today as there are people getting COVID-19. So that's something, if a Whoop member sees in their data that their respiratory rate is jumping, and mind you, it jumps off the screen. I mean, you have a baseline of 12. all of a sudden you're going to see you have a respiratory rate of 16 or 17. I mean, it's just like
Right.
you've had a 12
Right.
for 6 months, and all of a sudden you're at 16.
Right. The heart rate can jump all over the place incidentally, right, with lots of signal noise, but respiratory rate's fairly consistent in a person's life, right? There's not huge variability.
It just doesn't change. Yeah, it really doesn't change. It's a little different if you're a smoker. Smoking can increase your respiratory rate. And so if you smoke infrequently, that could be something that jumps it around a little bit. But for the most part, our population doesn't smoke. And so it's a flat, their scores are just completely flat and then jumps.
Sleep apnea. Does your respiratory rate change in the kind of a way that you'd pick up? Or do you have a consistently inconsistent respiratory rate?
It might change if you all of a sudden start using a CPAP machine. So the machines that help you with sleep apnea. But again, otherwise, it'll be fairly consistent.
Now, do you do it? And have you pushed out alerts to your members saying, if you notice this change in your respiratory rate, you might want to go to a doctor or.
Well, we're walking a fine line because we are not a medical device. However, we do measure data that's medically significant. And so we've presented all of this information to our members. We don't want to overstate it, but the reality is if you see a dramatic increase in your respiratory rate, something may be up. And we now show trends to our members every day that allow them to see, here's your typical range. So you take a graph, you have a bar and it shows this is where you normally are. And if you see a dot above that bar, that's a sign that something's up.
Which makes sense, right? Because the other way, the early warning signal is to measure the level of oxygen in your blood. An oximeter, I forget the name of the device, right? That could do it.
Pulse oximeter, yeah.
Yeah, pulse oximeter. Similar theory, right? Presumably, right? The more labor you're breathing, the less oxygen you're getting, and so forth.
Yeah, it is. I think it's less reliable, but it is something that people are using.
Okay, so tell me your vision now for it. You've made it. A lot of, like to your point, a lot of competitors are gone. You're still here. You're gaining more and more traction, right? Just give me the long play, or what your vision is for Whoop.
Well, we want to be the authority on human performance. So if any individual says to himself or herself, I want to improve my performance, they think of Whoop. And that's technology that lives throughout your body, potentially over time inside your body. That's a 24/7 coach that's telling you how to, understand data and how to improve, how to behave. And I use those words carefully. I mean, it's 24/7. It evolves over time. I don't think a piece of hardware from a business model standpoint is designed to evolve over time. The reason you bought something 6 months ago may not be what you need it for today. And that's where Whoop, because of our business model as a subscription, it forces us to deliver value to you today. And otherwise you should cancel. So that's the responsibility that comes with our business model. I think it also is why we're building such a great product, is that we are constantly evolving it to be better and better every day.
I love that part. So what's a new feature that I can get excited about and look forward to? That's that nobody knows yet. Only me, just us right here.
Yeah, just the two of us right now. Well, look, I'll say this. We're constantly innovating around the soft goods side of the business. So that's like all the different ways you can wear this.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more mechanisms that allow you to wear this on your body. So that's pretty exciting. Mm-hmm. We have a number of new reports coming out. So, if you look in your app, you can see weekly reports, monthly reports. That's going to get more nuanced. We're doing a lot on the social side. So you're going to be able to create more teams, more challenges, find other people on the platform. We're working on content. So there's a lot coming.
So I crave a couple of things. I crave,
okay, tell me.
I feel like the word strain is a hard word for me to get my head around, that it's an ideal state that I want to. So some of the nomenclature I want to understand better or evolve it to be more aspirational as opposed to a word that in my mind says, should I be straining? Like, and why I want more understanding as to why that's an ideal threshold. I get stuck on that. That might be my obsession with words, but.
Well, it's a question of cardiovascular load. So strain is measuring the amount of cardiovascular load you undertake at any period of time. And the reality is if you don't put strain on your body's not going to get any stronger. So you have to take on strain to then in turn build muscle or build fitness. And so that's where that word comes from. another way to think about it is it's intensity times time. So intensity is how high your heart rate might be at any given point, and time is how long you spend there.
Right. That makes sense.
That's the math on your strain.
Heart rate variability, I think, is really interesting, and I could see a world in which we really start to try to influence heart rate variability because it's a proxy for your the sympathetic nervous system and your other nervous system out of whack. I crave some kind of integration with meditation in there. I know there are a million meditation apps.
We're working on that, actually.
I crave the ability to monitor my HRV in real time through the Whoop, so I can watch myself influence if now we're getting wonky, meditating or whatever, and control.
I've heard that before, and it's something we're interested in.
All right. We're doing product development right here. So let's take a couple of questions before I let you go. Heather, do you want to put a couple up? All right. Here you go. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see it on your side, Will?
Yes.
Okay.
Saima Khan, am I reading that correctly?
You are.
Okay. Be obsessed with the problem more than the solution. I love that. Was there a point when you thought the solution to your problem was too complex to solve? And when did you get back on your feet? Great question. I think every entrepreneur is always asking themselves that as they build something. Technically there were moments in time where we didn't actually know whether what we were building was possible. And I think that's what comes with actually taking on a real, true technological challenge or trying to be truly innovative. And the thing that I always like to remind myself is that overcoming a challenge like that is then something that makes the outcome that much harder for anyone else to do. So whatever I have to overcome right now it's going to the higher the bar someone else is going to have to get over too. And that is one thing I always came back to and just tell myself, well, look, we're going to get through this, but everyone else is going to have to do it too. And
I would say the same thing. I say our complexity is our moat. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right. It really is. And so, now having overcome some of those challenges, we do feel much stronger about our market position because we know how insanely difficult some of the technical challenges were.
A great question. Let's do it. Do you have time for two more? Let's do two more.
Yeah, let's do it.
What are your plans to leverage data for potential future pandemics? And have you considered marketing around consumer data? And have you had instances where members don't favor their data being used for these cases? It's a lot to unpack there, Will.
Yeah, I think the first and the most important thing to understand is that at Whoop, our business is selling you a membership. It's not selling your data to third parties. So Facebook's business model is to sell who you are to someone else or to an advertiser. That's not our business model, right? And it's never going to be. So we take data and privacy very seriously, in part because we had to deal with it for the best athletes in the world, like when we were 100 users. So we were worrying about this way too early, probably on your typical venture life cycle. And what we do is we try to de-identify, declassify a lot of data so that our own members can learn from it. So you could never identify who a single person was in a data set, but you can actually make some general recommendations based on that. And that's how it allows Whoop to provide value back to you, the individual, where your experience is actually getting better because there's more people on Whoop who look exactly like you. And so that's where there's some network effects that benefit your experience.
Great question. Here's one I actually am interested in. Do you envision integrating a nutritional tracking component into Whoop? And I agree. We're all waiting for the day where we don't have to put everything into MyFitnessPal. Can you please do that? That's going to measure the thermal dynamic ratio of heat in my mouth when I'm about to eat a gyro or an gyro, for those who want me to say it properly.
Well, my hope with nutrition is that we can skip a step and we'll be able to have a measurement that does calories in. So, I think having to input all of these things is sort of a nuisance in itself. And I'm in no race to try to build a copycat version of that. I think what's truly innovative is if you could measure something about your body that actually knows what it's consumed. And that technology is still a little ways away. We've looked at it pretty closely. And more broadly speaking, I think nutrition is really important. I think understanding how different things that you put in your body affect your body is really important. We have some functionality in the app today in the Whoop journal that allows you to say whether you're on a diet or off a diet. And we'll show you.
To MyFitnessPal or vice versa, so that you can integrate the two and you can start tracking, recovery and sleep based upon what you ate as a ratio of
We're
carbs?
looking at that. We're looking at that carefully, and we are considering pulling more data in. We're a little bit more hesitant to push data out.
Got it. Let me let's end on this one. This is actually from someone on my team, Heather. And interesting listening to you talk. I now have a clear sense why you're still here and others are gone, because you're just so but you're so thoughtful. I could see the way you think.
Appreciate that.
And your eyes travel as you're trying to figure out. You're just like you're there's a purity to how you behave, which is probably why you've been able to iterate through all these different problems. And this is probably some slavish devotion to efficiency I detect. So Heather's question is, I read a rule about purpose when it comes to meetings. Can you talk about that and how we can make our Zoom meetings more productive? And just generally your management philosophy about meetings and efficiency.
Well, a lot of things come to mind. I think the first thing is you want to make sure a meeting couldn't have been an email or, a couple bullets, right? You want to make sure that everyone who's in a meeting is adding value to it or can add value to it. Like, I tell people you're part of the team to tell us what to do, not vice versa, right? I didn't hire a world-class team to tell them what to do. You want to know from your people what to do. And that requires people speaking up. And so I generally think if you spend 30 minutes in a meeting, you haven't spoken, you shouldn't be in the meeting, or the meeting didn't have a clear purpose. And so I think that's a helpful framework that probably in turn cancels a lot of meetings or gets a smaller number of people into meetings. Because you call a meeting for 10, 12 people for an hour, you may have just spent a few $1,000s of the company's budget that otherwise, you can't just go down the street and spend a few $1,000s of the company's budget, but you can waste it on time. So people need to be, pretty thoughtful about each other's time, but at the same time, when you are there, be there and make decisions.
I love that point. I mean, why don't we end on that? I would argue everyone out there, if you look at anyone doing something very exceptional that looks really hard and complicated to pull off, you want to peer behind the curtain and you will find a very intentional life strategy about how they manage their time. There's just no other way. So you look at Elon Musk. How does a guy multitask, launch rockets to outer space while creating the electric car, while fixing solar power, while doing the Boring Company, all these other things? It's because he's laser focused and hyper intentional about his time. Same thing with Jeff Bezos and his hacks. He puts out a memo prior to every meeting, makes everybody sit there and read it first, and then he talks about it. And Will, I get the sense that you were able to get here through, just being smart and intentional about your time. So, before you launch anything, you really got to audit. How do I say no more, to things that are just a distraction? How do I organize our behavior? How do I run our company? And don't be afraid to exclude people who just don't have anything to offer because you're not doing them a service either. They're sitting there quietly thinking I don't know why I'm here, but it's totally. The illusion of progress. But it's great having you on. I'm really excited. I'm proudly wearing this. It really is. Man. Exceptional product. What I love is the brilliance of it. You measure the heart rate 8 million times a nanosecond, and I know you didn't have to. So part of the reason why I love it, I see a lot of exquisite engineering into it that might have seemed unnecessary, and you could have gotten by. The Apple Watch measures it. I don't know how many times, but certainly not a million times the way you do. There's there's a lot of things you didn't need to do that it's almost like artistry around the product, and I know what it would take to get here. The fact that you're doing it on a subscription model is brilliant because, to your point, if you're not providing enough value, I walk away, right? Whereas if it had been a one-time purchase, you would have pocketed the $400, and then okay, I'm still going to walk away. It changes your behavior and it changes my behavior. So we're in a relationship now, right? That I can't let go because I got to know, how did I sleep last night? So
yeah, that's the goal, man.
Yeah, I'm proud of you, proud of your whole team. I mean, I can't wait to see the IPO, whatever it is the end result is, but just keep doing what you're doing. All right.
Thanks, Matt. This was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for joining us. All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you later in the week. We have Robert Herkovic. We haven't announced it yet. I think it's going to be on Thursday at 1:00. Just love spending time with Robert, and not sure what we're going to talk about, but I know it'll be good. All right. Take care.